For nearly 2 decades, a shadow of terror loomed over America as an anonymous figure unleashed a deadly bombing campaign targeting universities, airlines, and individuals across the country. The Unabomber, as the media dubbed him, became one of the most feared and elusive criminals in modern history. His bombs were meticulously crafted, designed not just to kill, but to send a chilling message to a society he despised. In this prologue, we introduce you to the reign of terror that began in 1978. What started as mysterious explosions escalated into a full-blown national crisis. The victims were seemingly random, and the authorities had no idea who they were up against. The FBI, overwhelmed with the complexity of the case, faced one of their greatest challenges yet. Newspapers were filled with headlines about the mysterious bomber, but no one knew when or where he would strike next. The lack of motive, the cryptic messages, and the unpredictability of his attacks gripped the nation with fear. In the next chapter, we'll take a closer look at the man behind the terror, Ted Kaczynski, and his unexpected path from mathematical genius to one of the most dangerous criminals in history. Long before Ted Kaczynski became the Unabomber, he was known as a child prodigy, a brilliant mind destined for greatness. Born in 1942, Kaczynski's early life was marked by extraordinary academic achievement. At just 16 years old, he enrolled at Harvard University, where he excelled in mathematics and later earned a PhD. However, despite his intellect, something darker was brewing beneath the surface. Kaczynski's time at Harvard was pivotal. During his undergraduate years, he participated in a controversial psychological study that some believe may have contributed to his growing resentment toward society. As he withdrew from academia, Ted became increasingly isolated, retreating into a small, remote cabin in the wilderness of Montana. It was there that his hatred for modern technology, industrial society, and the influence of the government intensified. Kaczynski believed that technology was destroying human freedom, and he saw himself as the only one capable of stopping it. This warped ideology would soon lead him down a path of violence and destruction. In this chapter, we explore the transformation of Ted Kaczynski from a promising scholar into a reclusive and dangerous criminal. His disillusionment with society and growing paranoia would lay the foundation for a deadly campaign that would soon grip the nation in fear. Next, we'll dive into the chilling details of the Unabomber's bombing campaign and how he began to execute his twisted vision. Ted Kaczynski's violent manifesto against modern society wasn't just written on paper. It was carved into the lives of his victims through his carefully crafted bombs. His first attack came in 1978 when a package bomb exploded at Northwestern University, injuring a professor. This marked the beginning of what would become a deadly campaign spanning nearly 2 decades. The bombings were terrifying in their precision. Kaczynski sent packages to unsuspecting targets, universities, airlines, and individuals who he believed were complicit in the advancement of technology. Each bomb was ingeniously designed, leaving little to no trace of its maker. This unpredictability and lack of motive sent shockwaves through law enforcement and the public alike. No one knew who he would target next or why. But Kaczynski wasn't just seeking to cause destruction. He wanted to send a message, and he did so through his chilling writings. His anti-technology, anti-industrial manifesto, titled Industrial Society and Its Future, laid out his belief that modern technological progress was destroying human freedom. He saw his bombings as necessary acts of rebellion, the only way to force society to reckon with its path toward what he saw as enslavement by machines. As the FBI scrambled to find leads, they were faced with an adversary who seemed always one step ahead. Kaczynski's ability to evade capture for years left investigators baffled and the public terrified. In the next chapter, we'll explore the intense manhunt that followed, the FBI's greatest challenge yet, as they desperately tried to track down the elusive Unabomber. As Ted Kaczynski's bombing campaign continued to escalate, The FBI found itself locked in a race against time. With each new explosion, panic spread, and pressure mounted on law enforcement to stop the mysterious bomber before he struck again. But tracking down the Unabomber proved to be one of the FBI's most challenging cases in modern history. The investigation was codenamed Unabomb, short for University and Airline Bomber, and it quickly grew to become the largest and most expensive manhunt the agency had ever undertaken. For nearly 2 decades, the FBI was chasing a ghost. Kaczynski left almost no forensic evidence, and his bombs were meticulously constructed to avoid detection. FBI agents were working tirelessly, but they were dealing with an adversary who was not only brilliant, but also extremely careful. Kaczynski communicated through cryptic letters, leaving investigators with few solid leads. The case dragged on for years, leaving the public in a state of constant fear and uncertainty. The FBI used every tool at its disposal: psychological profiling, linguistic analysis, and advanced forensic techniques. They built a profile of the Unabomber. A lone male, likely a recluse, with an exceptional knowledge of bomb making and an intense hatred for modern technology. Despite their efforts, he remained elusive. It wasn't until a major break came in the form of the Unabomber's manifesto that the tide began to turn. But with the clock ticking and no clear suspect in sight, the FBI needed more than just words to bring the bomber to justice. In the next chapter, we'll explore the game-changing moment when the Unabomber's manifesto was published and how it led to the most significant breakthrough in the case. In 1995, after nearly 2 decades of terror, the Unabomber made a bold move that would change the course of the investigation. Ted Kaczynski sent a 35,000-word manifesto to major newspapers, including the New York Times and the Washington Post, demanding that it be published in full. His ultimatum was clear: if they printed his manifesto, he would cease his deadly bombing campaign. If they refused, more lives would be lost. The manifesto, titled Industrial Society and Its Future, was an eerie, detailed rant against modern technology and industrialization. Kaczynski argued that technological progress was stripping humanity of its freedom, and that revolution, through violence if necessary, was the only way to restore balance. He blamed the government, corporations, and universities for their role in advancing what he saw as a dystopian future. The FBI was faced with a difficult choice. Should they publish the ramblings of a terrorist? After much debate, they decided to take the risk, hoping that someone might recognize the distinct writing style and offer a clue to the bomber's identity. The manifesto was printed in September 1995, and it instantly grabbed national attention. For the first time, the public got a glimpse into the mind of the Unabomber, a man who believed he was waging a righteous war against the modern world. The gamble paid off. As millions read Kaczynski's words, one man, in particular, began to connect the dots: Ted's own brother, David Kaczynski. The manifesto contained phrases and ideas that were disturbingly familiar, setting in motion the events that would finally lead to Ted Kaczynski's capture. In the next chapter, we'll dive into the pivotal moment when a brother's discovery unraveled the decades-long mystery, leading to the Unabomber's downfall. In the fall of 1995, the Unabomber's manifesto was published, and it reached millions of readers. Among them was David Kaczynski, Ted's younger brother. As David read the manifesto, a deep sense of dread settled in. The words, the phrasing, and the ideas sounded all too familiar. They mirrored thoughts and conversations he had once had with his older brother, Ted. David couldn't shake the feeling that the man responsible for the bombings was none other than his own sibling. This realization set David on a heartbreaking path. He was torn between loyalty to his brother and his moral responsibility to stop a killer. David and his wife, Linda, agonized over the decision for months, trying to reconcile the Ted they knew with the terrorist now revealed to the world. In the end, David chose to do what he believed was right. He contacted the FBI with his suspicions, handing over letters and documents that Ted had written over the years. This courageous and painful act was the key breakthrough the FBI had been waiting for. With David's help, they were able to connect Ted Kaczynski to the Unabomber case. Agents began to focus their investigation on Ted's remote cabin in Montana, where he had lived as a recluse for years, cut off from society. For David, the decision to turn in his brother was nothing short of tragic. He knew that exposing Ted meant condemning him to a lifetime behind bars, but the weight of the Unabomber's crimes left him no choice. David's betrayal of his brother would ultimately save countless lives, but it came at an unimaginable personal cost. In the next chapter, we'll witness the dramatic moment when FBI agents finally closed in on the Unabomber, leading to his arrest and the end of his reign of terror. On April 3, 1996, after nearly 2 decades of fear and destruction, the FBI finally closed in on Ted Kaczynski's remote cabin in the wilderness of Montana. Armed with the information provided by his brother David, agents obtained a search warrant and surrounded the isolated shack that had been Ted's home for years. The cabin itself, no larger than a small shed, was a disturbing reflection of Kaczynski's twisted mind, a place of complete isolation, filled with bomb-making materials, journals, and manifestos detailing his hatred for modern society. The arrest was executed with extreme caution. The FBI knew they were dealing with a dangerous individual who could have booby-trapped his surroundings. Ted Kaczynski, however, was taken into custody without a fight. As the agents entered the cabin, they uncovered a chilling trove of evidence that directly linked him to the Unabomber bombings, detailed bomb construction plans, sketches, and materials used in past attacks. They had finally captured the man behind the deadly campaign. What made the capture so striking was the contrast between the FBI's high-tech investigation and Kaczynski's primitive lifestyle. Living without electricity or running water, he had managed to outsmart some of the brightest minds in law enforcement for nearly 20 years. His cabin was a window into the mind of a man who rejected society, yet wielded technology as a weapon to destroy it. For the FBI and the public, the arrest was a moment of immense relief. The Unabomber was finally unmasked, and the reign of terror was over. But as Ted Kaczynski was led away in handcuffs, questions lingered. How could someone so intelligent, so educated, become one of the most dangerous criminals in modern history? In the next chapter, we'll follow Kaczynski's journey through the legal system as he faced justice for his crimes, and the world got a closer look at the man behind the terror. After his arrest, Ted Kaczynski's trial became one of the most highly anticipated legal battles of the decade. The world was eager to see how the man who had eluded authorities for nearly 20 years and wreaked havoc across the country would face justice. But as the case unfolded, it became clear that Kaczynski had no intention of making things easy. Kaczynski was indicted on 10 counts of transporting, mailing, and using bombs that killed 3 people and injured 23 others. Initially, his defense team, in consultation with his family, sought to use an insanity plea to spare him from the death penalty. But Ted, a brilliant mind trapped in his own delusions, rejected this defense. He was adamant that he was not insane and demanded to represent himself in court. As the legal proceedings dragged on, tensions mounted. Kaczynski's erratic behavior in court and refusal to cooperate with his lawyers added to the spectacle. He saw the trial as an attack on his ideals, not just his actions. Ted's refusal to allow an insanity defense was part of his desire to control his narrative and maintain the image of himself as a revolutionary, not a madman. However, in the face of overwhelming evidence, Kaczynski ultimately pled guilty to all charges in exchange for life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole. This deal avoided the death penalty, but ensured he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The courtroom drama ended with Kaczynski being sentenced to life in federal prison, where he remains today. The trial raised numerous questions about mental illness, responsibility, and the thin line between genius and madness. While justice was served, the trial left many wondering, was Kaczynski a calculated terrorist, or a deeply disturbed man whose brilliance became his downfall? In the next chapter, we'll explore the lasting legacy of the Unabomber, how his crimes, manifesto, and capture influenced society, and what lessons remain from one of the most notorious cases in history. Even after his capture and conviction, Ted Kaczynski's impact on society didn't fade. His manifesto, Industrial Society and Its Future, continued to resonate with certain fringe groups, while his bombings left a lasting mark on how we view domestic terrorism. The case also had a profound effect on law enforcement, media, and the way society addresses the delicate balance between technology, freedom, and security. The publication of Kaczynski's manifesto sparked ongoing debates about technological progress, industrialization, and individual freedom. Although his methods were violent and destructive, his critique of modern society's reliance on technology struck a chord with some. His writings have since been cited by both extremists and academics, as well as individuals questioning the consequences of unbridled technological growth. For law enforcement, the Unabomber case revolutionized the way future criminal investigations would be conducted. Linguistic analysis, used to match the manifesto to Kaczynski's earlier writings, became a key tool in modern forensic investigation. The case also emphasized the importance of collaboration between the FBI, media outlets, and the public. The decision to publish the manifesto may have been controversial, but it ultimately led to the breakthrough needed to capture one of the most elusive criminals in history. The Unabomber's legacy also touches on ethical dilemmas regarding mental illness, justice, and responsibility. Kaczynski's rejection of an insanity plea and his steadfast belief in his own ideology blurred the lines between genius and madness. His case prompted discussions about how to handle individuals whose brilliance is intertwined with violent extremism. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Unabomber is the fear he instilled, a fear of the unknown, of the isolated individual plotting in the shadows, and of the potential for destruction in the name of ideology. The name Unabomber will forever be linked to a period of terror, but it also stands as a reminder of the dangers that can arise when intelligence, isolation, and a warped worldview collide. In our final chapter, we'll reflect on the personal toll this case took on Ted Kaczynski's family, particularly his brother David, whose painful decision to turn in his sibling left a lasting emotional scar. Behind the headlines, the bombings, and the trial lies a deeply personal and heartbreaking story, the story of David Kaczynski, the man who made the gut-wrenching decision to turn in his own brother. For David, discovering that Ted was the Unabomber wasn't just a revelation, it was a devastating emotional crisis. He had always looked up to Ted as a brilliant, albeit eccentric, older brother. But when David recognized Ted's writing in the published manifesto, he was faced with an unimaginable choice. David struggled for months, torn between family loyalty and moral responsibility. It was his wife, Linda, who first voiced the possibility that Ted could be the Unabomber, but it was David who ultimately decided to reach out to the FBI. His decision was driven by the hope of stopping further violence, but it came with an overwhelming sense of guilt and loss. In helping to capture the Unabomber, David knew he was also sealing his brother's fate, and this burden weighed heavily on him. David's decision to turn in Ted was not the end of his journey. In the years since the arrest, David has become an outspoken advocate against the death penalty and for mental health awareness. He continues to reflect on the complex legacy of his brother and the emotional toll it took on his family. He has spoken openly about the deep sense of grief and conflict that still lingers, even though he knows that stopping Ted saved lives. For David, there was no triumph in the capture of his brother, only sorrow and a lingering question. Could anything have been done to stop Ted before his descent into violence? It's a question that haunts not only David, but many who followed the Unabomber case. In the end, the story of the Unabomber is not just about bombs and manifestos, it's also about the painful reality of a family torn apart by tragedy. David's decision may have saved lives, but it also left him with the enduring pain of a brother lost to extremism and violence.